Welcome back to TMP Origins. If you've been following this series, you already know we've hit the road to New Orleans, handled the rental drama, overcame the flat tire, survived Maggie the GPS, and settled into the historic Canal Street Inn. Today's episode is a little bit different. This one isn't about a single stop or landmark. This is about everything we noticed in between. The little details, the accidental photos, the histories peeking out of brickwork, and the quiet moments that changed how Dusty and I travel forever. These were the sparks, the in-between moments, the things we weren't even looking for that ended up shaping the way we wander today. So in this episode, I'm not taking you to a specific place. I'm taking you into the way we started seeing places. Because somewhere between Canal Street and the French Quarter, something shifted. We stopped rushing, and we started noticing. These were taken on old budget Androids, long before we bought capture cams. Grainy, imperfect, and exactly right for the story they tell. New Orleans never asks its buildings to match, only to stand, side by side, weathering heat, storms, and time in their own way. That's the secret beauty of this street. It's a reminder that the strongest partnerships aren't made of identical pieces, but harmonious contrasts. This city reflects exactly what Key and Dusty became. Two different histories, two different architectures of the heart, held together by curiosity, laughter, and the courage to wander. As we wandered through the French Quarter, the noise and movement blurred into this chaotic river of sound, until this guy stopped us both cold. A street performer, frozen mid-step, mid-story, mid-breath. So perfectly still, it felt like time itself was holding its breath with him. Dusty whispered, "How is he not wobbling?" And honestly, I was thinking the same thing. In a city that never stops moving, here was a man who mastered stillness like it was an art form. And for a split second, the whole street moved around him while we stood amazed. New Orleans has this way of serving you poetry one second and pure slapstick the next. Case in point, at some point in the quarter, a woman walked by with an actual target printed right on her backside. A literal bullseye. Dusty and I dissolved, not because we're mature, seasoned travelers, but because we're the kind of people who still find that kind of cosmic placement absolutely hilarious. It was like the city itself winked at us and said, "Hey, don't take yourselves too seriously. You're tourists today. Lean in." It was the kind of tiny travel moment that hits just right. A giggle fit that resets your whole mood and reminds you that wandering is supposed to be fun. And looking back, I think that's when the trip loosened its grip on stress and snapped into adventure mode. One target printed butt cheek at a time. Somewhere between repairing a tire, picking up my son, missing our cemetery tour, and dodging traffic like two budget-level Fast and Furious extras, we passed this old brick warehouse. Dixie Mills Supply Company. The lettering ghosted on the wall like a memory that refused to scrub away. Dusty and I both went, ooh, because that's who we are. Show us a century-old building with fading paint and we're basically moths to a porch light. Maybe that's when I realized this trip wasn't just a pickup run. We weren't rushing anymore. We were noticing things. Loving the old bones of a place. Letting the city's history tap us on the shoulder. Somewhere along Canal Street, we passed this one stubborn little building smushed between two giants, like the architectural version of a Chihuahua holding back two Great Danes. Dusty and I cracked up because it just fit us. Two big, loud forces of the world towering on either side, but there in the middle is this squat, determined survivor of a building, whispering, "I may be short, but I am not going anywhere." New Orleans does that, hides these little fighters in plain sight, and for some reason, on this trip, we noticed them. At one point, we rode past this old brick wall with nothing beside it but a tiny yellow guard shack and a tree fighting for its life. Just this raw, exposed side of a building, like the city had peeled back a layer and left the scar visible. What used to be here? Dusty asked it first. I was thinking the same thing. New Orleans does that. Lets you see the absences, not just the architecture. Every empty lot feels like a ghost story that never got written down. We didn't find the answer that day, just another question. And honestly, that's when I realized that wandering with Dusty was different. We weren't just passing through places anymore. We were wondering about them. Somewhere in the French Quarter, we passed one of those ceramic Spanish-era street plaques, the ones that remind you New Orleans has worn more flags than a parade float. 1762 to 1803, Calle de Tolosa. I'm sure I mispronounced that, so terribly sorry. Truly. A whole different identity, still whispering through the bricks. Dusty and I both stopped to read it, because that's just who we are. The kind of travelers who hit the brakes for a history plaque like it's a celebrity sighting. We brake for signs. There's something about New Orleans that doesn't hide its past. It stacks it. Layers on layers on layers. French stones under Spanish names under American noise. And somewhere in that moment, I felt it again. We weren't just driving through the city this time. We were letting it speak. We passed this building on the corner. All wrought iron balconies, sun-faded shutters, and that I've seen some things posture that older New Orleans architecture always seems to have. Dusty and I looked at it at the exact same time and asked the exact same question. Is that one haunted? In New Orleans, it's a fair guess. Every balcony feels like it's holding an old secret. Every window like it's watching you back. And suddenly, we weren't just driving the streets. We were imagining the stories. That was new for us. Seeing a place, not just for what it is, but for what it remembers. At some point, we passed this empty wall. Just a scarred slab of brick and plaster with palm trees lined up like they were guarding the ghost of whatever used to stand there. Dusty snapped this picture and immediately hit me with her favorite question. Okay, but what was here? No plaque, no sign, just the outline of a building that had been erased. And somehow that mystery hooked us harder than anything polished or pretty. I didn't know it then, but this was the beginning of our ruin hunting era. The quiet thrill of catching a place mid-transformation and feeling the pull of the untold story. Then there was this. A little green rebel sprouting straight out of a crack in the concrete wall. Sideways. Like it took one look at physics, shrugged, and did whatever it wanted anyway. But how, though? Dusty whispered it like she was witnessing witchcraft. Honestly, same. Moments like this hit different in New Orleans. Everything grows where it shouldn't. Everything survives what it shouldn't. The city is basically one giant lesson in stubborn resilience. And I think that tiny sideways plant said more about this trip than anything else. Sometimes you just grow in the direction the world gives you, and you thrive anyway. Dusty snapped this one, a faded advertisement clinging to the side of an old building like it refused to be forgotten. Ginger mint julep, it said, just barely. New Orleans is full of these ghost signs, these painted memories from businesses long gone. They weather, they peel, but they stay, like the city's way of refusing to erase anything that once mattered. We didn't know the story of this building. We didn't need to. It was enough to see the trace of what used to be, the evidence that life layered itself here long before we arrived. Looking back, these were the quiet moments that changed how we traveled. Tiny hints of history that made us slow down, lean in, and wonder. We rolled past these windows with their twisted columns and ornate archways, the kind of architecture that doesn't just sit on a building but poses for the city. Dusty saw it first. She always does with things like this. She grabbed my arm and went, "Look at those arches," the way other people point out celebrities. Traveling with Dusty meant noticing the details, the scroll work, the textures, the pieces of craftsmanship that most folks drive right past. Somewhere in these little reactions, these shared gasps over tiny, beautiful things, you can see the beginnings of how we travel now. Eyes open, cameras ready, hearts tuned into the old world charm most people miss. We parked here thinking we were finally going to make that cemetery tour. Spoiler, we did not. But what grabbed us wasn't the tour we missed. It was the strange little scar of a building right beside the lot. Half a wall, half a doorway, half a story. Okay, but what used to be here? Dusty said it like a detective arriving at a cold case. New Orleans has these gaps, places where a building once stood, erased but not quite forgotten. You can see the outline of a roofline, the ghosts of old wallpaper, the jagged edge of a life lived in brick. And honestly, those missing pieces fascinated us as much as the place is still standing. It was moments like this that nudged us closer to the explorers we'd eventually become. The kind of travelers who stop for ruins, who chase absence as much as presence, who go look for the story even when the story's no longer there. Dusty took this picture too, actually 2 of them, because this old brick beauty was holding its ground beside a giant modern office block. The contrast was hilarious and perfect. This delicate, historic hotel standing there like, I may be small, but I am iconic. We loved it instantly. The way the cornices curled, the way the windows lined up like soldiers, the way it refused to be overshadowed, even with a glass and steel skyscraper leaning over it like a bully. Look at her, Dusty said. She's not going down without a fight. And honestly, same, girl. New Orleans does this. Lets old and new sit side by side like mismatched roommates who've learned to coexist. And something about this scene made us feel protective, like we were rooting for the underdog building. It was another tiny moment that cracked our curiosity wide open. Because once you start noticing little survivors like this, you start noticing everything. We rolled past this old movie theater, the kind with the vertical sign that looks like it's been hanging there since the golden age of jazz. Dusty loved it instantly because, well, old shit is our love language. And because I cannot resist being ridiculous, I pointed right at that marquee and said, "Look, Dusty, that's where you find joy." She gave me the kind of look only a best friend of decades can give. Half judgment, half fondness, all exasperation. But she snapped a picture anyway, because even my dumb jokes count as documentation on these trips. It's funny. Looking back, those little moments of silliness were part of what made this trip feel different. We were loosened up, laughing more, letting ourselves be present instead of stressed. We didn't just see the city, we let it play with us. There was this moment rolling through the quarter when Dusty made the world's fastest grab for her camera. I turned to see what she was photographing, and of course, it was a sign that said, "Prohibition, huge ass beers." New Orleans has a way of dropping history and chaos right beside each other like mismatched roommates, and Dusty loves both with equal enthusiasm. She laughed, snapped the picture, and said, "I'm not drinking one, but I respect it." It was one of those tiny memories, silly, quick, totally unimportant, except it wasn't. Because these little bursts of shared humor are what made this trip feel lighter, like the city was letting us laugh our way into a new chapter. At one point, we rolled past the balcony dripping in Mardi Gras colors. Purples, yellows, greens, but what stopped Dusty cold wasn't the decor, it was the flamingo. A giant, ridiculous, ribbon-covered flamingo perched like it owned the place. Dusty lit up. Her aunt loves flamingos, and suddenly this random balcony in New Orleans felt like a cosmic inside joke meant just for her. It was such a tiny detail, a soft little moment, but it reminded me how travel always blends your past with wherever you are. One minute you're in the middle of a city you barely know. The next you're thinking of someone you love because a pink plastic bird waved at you from a balcony. On the way into New Orleans, Dusty was desperately trying to get a picture of a pretty little church off the highway. The only problem? Her camera app loads slower than a dial-up modem in a thunderstorm. So instead of the church, she got this. A random white building with a roof line that looks like it's auditioning for a haunted dollhouse, plus a power pole straight out of Close Encounters. Honestly though, these accidental photos become part of our tradition. The pictures that weren't meant to be taken. The places that weren't meant to be seen. But somehow they always fit the story anyway. Travel isn't perfect. Cameras aren't perfect. But sometimes the almost picture is just as much part of the memory as the one you wanted. And of course, we had to grab this shot. St. Louis Cathedral, rising at the end of the street like a storybook illustration, dropped right into the middle of New Orleans chaos. Cars streaming past, tourists wandering, musicians warming up on the sidewalk. And there it is, that triple spire crown watching over it all. It's funny. This view is about as tourist classic as it gets. But in that moment, it didn't feel cliche. It felt like we were finally seeing the heart of the city instead of rushing through it. The cathedral, the quarter, the noise, the heat. It all hit differently on this trip. Maybe because we weren't stressed. Maybe because we were awake to the details. Maybe because it was Dusty's first time. But this was one of the first moments where I thought, yeah, we need to get out more. This was the moment the trip started breathing differently for us. When laughter, curiosity, missed turns, and unplanned stops turned into something bigger. Something that would become travel made personal, long before we had a name for it. These weren't our destinations. These were the in-between moments, the ones that taught us to wander, to wonder, to change course without panicking, and to look at the world through softer, wider eyes. These weren't planned stops. They were the moments that made the trip ours. And somewhere along the way, the universe decided to give us a third travel companion. Murph decided to join us. He could have chosen someone else, but here he is. And weirdly, he's helped us make the most of every single detour. That has led to some of our most awesome stops. So I won't say it often, but thanks for that, Murph. Next week, we shift gears again, because the cemeteries we visited on this trip gave us our first glimpse into New Orleans' heavier stories, and those moments deserve their own episode. So hit subscribe if you want to keep following our early adventures, and hey, get out there and explore the world your way.